Hello all, Munch here. Welcome to the first ever episode of Six Pointer. I don't think I'm quite informed on football, and I've had a couple of requests kind of get my opinions on things because I don't do a lot of real life based football sort of vlogs or podcasts or opinions or anything like that. Essentially, so what Six Pointer is me going over six major talking points of the week in the world of football. This week I'm going to kick it off with the big news that Watford have sacked Javi Gracia. Whether I think it's harsh or not, I'm not 100% sure. You look at the form at the end of last season, they had a very poor run to the end, but then that can be attributed to the fact that they'd also made an FA Cup final. The fact they made an FA Cup final in itself is a massive achievement for a team like Watford, no disrespect meant, but it kind of brought back a little bit of the cup magic of them being able to get there. They obviously got pumped 6-0 by City in that, and I don't think that they ever really recovered from it. And Gracia seems quite one-dimensional in his tactics. Playing Will Hughes at a position on the right-hand side is not the best thing to do. He's obviously better as a central midfielder, and they don't really have any out-and-out wingers. A lot of their wing play comes from the fullbacks, very similar to the way that Liverpool play, but obviously with a less calibre of player, and they play two players up front. I don't think it's helped that Troy Deeney got himself injured earlier on in this season, and he's been a little bit out of form towards the tail end of last year, and obviously in this season at the start of it, even though it was obviously cut short with injury. You take into account the fact that they only drew 1-1 with Newcastle, and I think that was really the icing on the cake. Their start wasn't actually particularly that difficult, and they are games that you would expect them to win. I think they're just having a bit of a hangover from last season. In terms of bringing in Kike Flores, an old manager, knows the team very well. A bit well defensively drilled, which I think is obviously good for them. But I think actually one of the main problems is going forward and scoring goals. And I'm not sure if he is the man to be able to fix that. I can easily see him probably going before the end of the season as well, which doesn't bode well for Watford. I still think that they'll be fine because I think the squad's got too much quality to go down. Deulofeu is so hit and miss, but on his day, he can literally be one of the best players in the Premier League, almost unplayable. When Deeney comes back, I'm sure he'll be reinvigorated and want to save the team that he loves. Andre Gray is a decent forward, and they have got very good midfielders, obviously with Doucouré, Capoue. They're a very good defensive midfield partnership, and Will Hughes is a player that's got some talent, but is probably being a little bit underused and may not ever really reach the potential that I think we saw early on in his career at Derby. The main problem they have is at the back. Ben Foster is a wonderful goalkeeper, but the rest of the defence is a little bit shocking. Okay, that I think it's almost like a championship defence, but with a good Premier League midfield and maybe a decent Premier League strike force ahead. I do think they'll be fine because I think they'll probably give Big Sam a call in Christmas to get him in. They won't. I hope that they don't because they probably deserve something a little bit better. And their model works for them. You know, they sack managers. Gracia had lasted maybe a bit too long for a Watford manager. So it's a shame to see him go. I do think it's a little bit harsh and a bit premature, but form is everything in this. And obviously getting to an FA Cup final doesn't really mean that much anymore. Speaking of teams that are struggling, we are going to move on to the newly promoted teams and how I think that they've done. I say struggling, the majority of them have actually done very well. Sheffield United being the real surprise package, obviously. I believe they're sat on 5 points at the moment. They've got themselves a win and they got themselves 2 draws, most notably the 2-2 away at Stamford Bridge against the Chelsea team that are leaking goals left, right and centre. They play a very good brand of football with the wing back, well, I say the wing centre-backs is probably the best way of putting it, with the centre-backs part and almost play like wing-backs. And I believe their manager, Chris Waller, he is brilliant. Like, there's no getting around that. I think he is a top quality manager and he'll be going places. I still think that they're going to go down because I just don't think they have enough going forward. Even if they get Ravel Morrison on side and get him playing really well, I don't think it's going to be enough. But they made a very decent start. I just have that feeling that they're one of those teams that make a decent start and then it will gradually wear down and then eventually they will go out of it as well. I think it's quite a similar thing with Norwich. I think they play brilliant football. They've been probably the most entertaining to watch, I think, out of the 3 promoted teams. But I think that they'll get goals. But I think once Pukki gets found out in the Premier League, which I think eventually he will do, his movement is brilliant. But he's not particularly quick. He's not particularly big or strong. He's all based on good movement. And if defenders start picking that up, then their goals are going to start drying up. I think they're very good offensively and they will score a fair few amount of goals, but once those start to dry up, you cannot rely on that defence to keep clean sheets. So I anticipate that they are really going to struggle as well. And even though they've made probably a slow start compared to what I thought they would, I actually think the best equipped to stay up out of the promoted teams is Aston Villa. Their squad depth is very impressive. Their first lineup and their first team is very impressive. They should have more points on the board than they actually do. They were robbed against Crystal Palace thanks to VAR, which I will hopefully never mention on 6 Pointer because it's too contentious a point and I don't really, it deserves a whole video on its own. But obviously they got a very good win against Everton. They were leading against Spurs and they were unlucky to lose against Bournemouth. So I think Villa are probably the best equipped. They've obviously got the biggest squad, mainly because they've spent the most money. They're not even playing Marvelous Nakamba yet, who's a very good player. Defensively, they're still a bit iffy, I think, but Tyrone Mings looks like he's a good quality Premier League central defender. And Engels looks very decent as well. Tom Heaton was a bargain signing for me. And Wesley looks like he could do some damage up top. So if I was to pick out the 3 promoted teams, which one I think will stay up, I think it will probably be Villa. But Norwich might do as well, depending on how Pookie gets on. In terms of who I do think will go down, I didn't do a Premier League predictions video this year, mainly because I did horrendously last year as well. I predicted Watford to go down. It might happen this year. In terms of who I do think will go down, I think this year I predict Sheffield United will go down, Brighton would go down, and Crystal Palace would go down. So far, it's a bit much of a muchness, really. It's hard to tell who's going to go down. Newcastle obviously got themselves a win against Spurs, and they were everyone's favourites to go down. But I think they've shown some really good fighting quality. I do think that they're eventually going to struggle. Joel Linton looks like a decent player. Almiron's obviously a very good player, but it's still yet to score for Newcastle, I think. Which isn't great, but he's injected a lot into it. They're really missing Rondon, and more importantly, they're missing Rafa Benitez. As much as Steve Bruce has a lot of heart and it's a club that he loves, he's not really a Premier League quality manager, and I think that might eventually catch up with them. So maybe they'd fall into my 3. Brighton seems to have started really well, but again, I think it's similar to the Brighton thing. I think eventually when teams find them out, then they're really going to struggle. And are they going to get enough goals? Trossard looks like a decent acquisition, but other than that, I don't think you can rely on Glenn Murray to get you 10 goals a season, 15 goals a season anymore. So Brighton for me is still down. And Palace was kind of based on the fact that Zaha was going to leave. Now that Zaha is staying, I'm not 100% sure. I look at their squad and I think it's decent, but it's not brilliant. And Zaha is obviously the magic stardust that comes with that. If he stays in January, I think Palace will stay up. If he doesn't stay in January, then I would be pretty sure that they'll go down, although it depends obviously on where they spend the money after that. But I'd be surprised if he stayed in January. Moving on to the other end of the table, and it's important to know that obviously I am a Liverpool fan. If you haven't really watched the channel before, I am a Liverpool fan, but I'm a realistic Liverpool fan. And even though we've made a brilliant start to the season, the title chase is going to probably be between us and City again this year. We've made a brilliant start, 4 wins out of 4, didn't really play particularly well that much in the first 2 games, but ground it out. Same really in most of the games. The Arsenal game, we were very good, and Burnley, we finally looked back to the team that did so well last year. Very solid at the back and clinical going forward. A 3-0 win away at Turf Moor is nothing to be scoffed at. The players are in form. Not really worried about the Mane and Salah spat. They've always been like, Salah's always been selfish, but that's why he scores so many goals. You know, you can say the same thing about Harry Kane at Spurs. He has about 50 shots a game as well. It's why they score the most. If you shoot more, you're more likely to score. It's as simple as that. Aguero is the same. He's just a lot more clinical. Moving on to Aguero, he started the season on fire, and so has Kevin De Bruyne, which is probably the reason why I think City will pip Liverpool to the title. Last year they didn't have De Bruyne, and they still won it. This year, they've arguably got the best midfielder in the planet, or on the planet, playing at the peak of his powers at the moment. I've watched pretty much every single City game, and he's just running the show. He is just incredible, and he's already my tip for PFA Player of the Year. And this year, I can see him dragging City to the title. The fact that they've lost the Porter is a big thing, but I still think defensively they've got more than enough cover. Their second 11 would beat any team in the Premier League, maybe apart from Liverpool's. Point 5 is going to be about the top 4 race. It's very open this year, actually. I think Spurs are still good enough to finish third. I still think they are easily the third best team in the country, but they're not playing like it right now because of all the unsettling of the European transfer window. Christian Eriksen wanting to go, Vertonghen and Alderweireld. You look at, if they lost those 3 players, Spurs would be quite an average team, minus Kane and Son. And I look at the rest of it, I think there's not really that much there. Kane, if Kane goes, which he probably will, I don't know if he will actually. I think he is one of those guys that will probably stay for life, and good on him. He'll probably end up breaking Alan Shearer's Premier League record if he can stay fit and if he stays at Spurs. I think that they're good enough to finish third. I think they'll safely do it now that Pochettino can probably settle everyone down. And Dombele looks like a really good signing as well. We haven't seen enough of Lo Celso, but we know he's a good footballer. I think they've got too many number 10s, in my opinion, but maybe Lo Celso is going to be Christian Eriksen's replacement going forward in the long run. I'm not 100% sure. Arsenal are probably the surprise package for me out of the top 4. They look good. Like, they look really good. Defensively, they look all over the place. But once David Luiz hits a little bit of form, I think they'll get much better defensively. But going forward, they are as good as anybody. I think they have a front three that would rival Liverpool's and City's front three. Aubameyang, Pepe, and Lacazette. Lacazette is such an underrated player. He should play more. And it's probably the reason why they didn't do that well at Anfield, is that they weren't playing him. I think they should have gone fire with fire and put the front three up there as well. Because in the end, they ended up getting spanked by Liverpool anyway. But I've been really impressed by what I've seen from Arsenal. Other than that, the fight back against Tottenham in the North London derby shows that there's actually that kind of grit and determination now. Guendouzi looks like a really good footballer, and I think he'll become an integral part of the team going forward over the few coming years. Chelsea, I actually predicted them to finish 8th this year, and at the moment I'm not changing my opinion on that. I think that they are struggling. Going forward, I think they look good, but I don't think they've got that much quality, especially in the big games. I can't see Tammy Abraham and Pulisic and Mason Mount, good as they are, turning up in the big games. I think young players will eventually get found out, and they are notoriously just inconsistent. I like what Lampard's trying to do, and I think Chelsea's academy is probably second only to City's in the Premier League, so they've obviously got a lot of talent there. It's more the fact that they've never really utilised it. Frank is trying to do that, but at the moment, like, they've just got so many problems at the back. Until Rudiger comes back, we can't really be sure how solid that defence is going to be. Azpilicueta, for me, is pound for pound still probably one of the best defenders that's ever played in the Premier League, and he still is now, but he needs more support. I don't think that they're a threat to the top 4 this year. And then moving on to a joint point, which is point 5 and point 6, which is Manchester United. Point 6 was going to be about how much United are struggling, so this is kind of a merger in between the two. United are... I mean, I won't lie, as a Liverpool fan, I'm relatively enjoying it at the moment. It's because I've been there, you know, we're going through the same transitional phase that United are going through right now. We've been there. I remember the days of Roy Hodgson and Kenny Dalglish and signing Andy Carroll for £35 million. I remember those days. Do you know what I mean? I've been there. We know what it's like. I remember when Stuart Downing was arguably our best player. Those were dark, dark days. And they're going through that at the moment. They've got some bad eggs in there. I think Paul Pogba is more trouble than he's worth. He's so inconsistent. He's suited to Italian football because it's slow and ponderous, and he's so much quicker and bigger and stronger than all the other players in that league because it is Italian football, and he's got time to sit up and pick a 50-yard pass. You don't get that in the Premier League. You can't be doing tricks in your own half because people are bang on you like that, and you don't get that kind of time in there. And he's just not a team player. It's all about him. It is all about Paul Pogba. It's the Paul Pogba show, and I think the sooner United get rid of him, the sooner there'll be a better team for it, even though he is probably naturally their best player. I like what Ollie's doing. I like the fact that it's young, it's British. You know, I think the majority of their team is British now. About 7 to 8 players, I think, in the lineup that started against Chelsea at the start of the season were British, and I think that is a brilliant thing for the Premier League, and it's good to see that a top team, and I do regard them as a top team, as begrudgingly, it's good to see that some of them are doing it, you know, that there isn't really enough of that, especially in the City lineup. There isn't enough good British talent. You can argue that there is in the Liverpool and Spurs teams, but there's not enough in the league in general, to be fair. To see a team like United doing it, I think is testament to Ollie and what he's trying to do, and I like the idea of it. I think that Harry Maguire is a decent signing, and he's proving to be very good. I don't think he's anywhere near as good as some of the other centre-backs. He's not in the same class as Laporte or Van Dijk. He's not the kind of player I'd build my team around, though, and I think maybe that's where United are struggling, is who do you build your team around? You can't build it around Pogba because you don't know what you're going to get from him, and you don't even know if he's going to be there in 6 months. You don't know what you're going to get with Rashford because he's still young and very raw and talented. I still think Martial is a more talented player than Rashford. It's a controversial opinion, but I actually think Martial is better and has got more potential than Marcus Rashford. I think why United are struggling, especially at Old Trafford, is because even though they have Pogba, they don't have that guile to break teams down. Pogba's too, like I said, because he's so inconsistent and you're relying on him to thread that pass or make that bit of magic, it's not going to happen. And because they're so based on pace, they're finding it really hard to get in behind teams that literally come and block it out, and they don't have the midfield quality to break teams down, and they don't have the quality in the fullback areas to whip the crosses in like Liverpool do or City do to be able to break teams down. There's no philosophy to United. There's beginning to be one with young English players, but I mean, like, there's no playing philosophy, there's no style to it. It's just kind of, I remember Paul Merson saying it, and I think it's sometimes actually he's very clever, Paul Merson, but he was just saying, and I get the same impression, that when United go out, Ollie kind of just sends them out and goes, go, play, which is good, but you still have to have some element of structure, because what happens when the boys play and they're not playing well and they can't find the patterns? If you don't have drilled in patterns and stuff and you're doing everything off the cuff, it all looks very just loose. There's no plan. There's no Do you know what I mean? There's not going to be any end product because there's no way of getting there. You need to have a plan of how you get to A to B, and United somewhere just don't have that. There's just no style of it. Until they can kind of really get that midfield quality and maybe some of the players mature a bit more, then United aren't really going to be a threat to anybody. And I'd be surprised if they finished in the top 4 this year. I would. Finish off 0.5, I mean that's finishing off 0.6, but maybe to finish off 0.5 then, where I say who's going to finish in the top 4. If you were me, I'd be looking at the moment of Liverpool and City, obviously. Spurs would be 3rd, and at the moment for me it'd be Arsenal in 4th. Defensively leaky as they might be, that front three is going to terrify anybody, and they will score goals for fun because they've also, in Ceballos and Guendouzi, I think they've got a really good midfield three. As soon as they get rid of Xhaka, they'll be fine. Thank you so much for watching this episode of 6 Pointers. I hope you have enjoyed it. It's going to be a nice brief one, just to kind of get us going and everything like that. And it's just nice to hear thoughts. Obviously, I want to hear all your thoughts in the comment section. I love talking about football. I love debating football. I love all things to do with football. And I'd like to think I'm relatively knowledgeable. You'll probably disagree after this episode, but you know, opinions are opinions. You know what I mean? I'm happy to hear everyone else's, even if it's not the same as mine. Thank you so much for watching the episode. I hope you have enjoyed it. Until I see you in the next episode of 6 Pointers, which will hopefully be coming out on a weekly basis, stay cool.